Well, hopefully I do this message today right. And by the end of it, you feel encouraged because today I want you to feel encouraged. Have you ever been to maybe it's a doctor's appointment or maybe it's a church service and you feel kind of beat up by it? And today the heart is that you feel fulfilled and content in the love of Christ because his love fills us up. And as we work through today's service, you're going to hear from me. We're going to hear from some others about how God's love, when they encountered him, it changed them. And so if you came in today, like just me thinking about, okay, what did I do wrong with that graphic, that QR code isn't on there? Sometimes we beat ourselves up because we do things imperfectly. And we are so hard on ourselves. And yet that is not the message of God. The message of God is that his grace and his mercy and springs of living waters, they fill us. And he makes us who we are. And today is a testimony to what happens when we encounter Jesus. And so over the last couple weeks, we've been doing this Create in Me series, and I have really enjoyed this time. You know that Jake does most of the speaking on the platform, and he does such a beautiful job of that. And for me, this is a little bit of a stretch, but I do enjoy getting an opportunity to be up here and to share what God's been doing in my own heart, what he's done in my own heart. And today is really an expression of that. And really this whole month, I've just felt his presence each Sunday. And so on the first Sunday, we started talking about Hannah. Hannah's story, we learned that God can do anything with an honest heart. And in fact, often when we're honest with him, that is the soil for some of his best, most spectacular miracles. And then the second week, Jake talked about Saul. Saul's story is a sad story, and really it's a warning to us to have not a heart filled with pride, but a heart that is humble and open and soft, that's teachable. And then last week we talked about our friend David. David who beat the giant, but also David who became king. And we learned from him that even when we make really big mistakes, which he did, we can still be people after God's heart. He made mistakes. But yet, what do we know about him? That he was a man who knew God, loved God, and that God called a man after his own heart. I want to be a woman after God's heart, mistakes and all. And so today we've been talking about the inner life, right? Like kind of how these moments with God change our heart. That's our series title, Create in Me a Clean Heart, a Humble Heart, an Honest Heart. But today we're talking about how that transformative work that happens inside of us changes us on the outside. The way we live, the way we interact, the way we see the color of the sky. When we fall in love with Jesus and understand what he's done for us, it should change everything. And indeed, it does. So have you guys ever just met someone and you're like, I think they might be a Christian? Like, or I think this person, there's something there that I'm drawn to. Well, okay, just bear with me here. This is going to connect. Some of you know that I love Instagram Reels. I have a real problem. Literally, get it? Real problem. Some of you have received maybe some Instagram Reels from me because I see something funny and I have to share it. It's like I have certain, different paths of ministry, and I feel like my Instagram Reel ministry is alive and well. But there's one that I really like, and so, Abby, if you want to put up the first screen. Okay, so this is a meme that we see often. If I win the lottery, I probably won't tell anyone, but there will be signs. Right? Okay, I love this. Look at all those puppies. Oh, I love dogs. And so this is like a very personal one. If I win the lottery, there will be signs. If I come into this great wealth and unlimited resources, there will be signs. Okay, you can go to the next one, Abby. So this one might be all of us right now. Maybe I wouldn't tell people I won the lottery, but there would be signs. Right now, groceries, I tried looking for one with eggs only, but I couldn't find it. It's just this funny thing. But why it's funny is it actually, I think, taps into the reality that if things were different for us, even if we didn't tell people, there would be signs. And so it's this funny thing that makes us laugh, but it also is a truth. And really, when we encounter Jesus, and you can take it off that or everyone's just going to be looking at the shopping cart. When we encounter Jesus, there should be signs. And so like I mentioned, like sometimes we run into someone, we meet someone, and we're like, there's something different about them. And I've had that just in my own life where people have encountered me. Actually, we first moved here, and this woman at one point, we were out in Alaska, and I wasn't even talking to her, and I really felt, it's too big of a story to go into, but she grabbed me, and she's like, I don't know what it is about you, but the moment I saw you, I just was drawn to you. And it was nothing about me. It was about God. It was about God. And so when we encounter Jesus, there should be signs. There should be signs. And there are signs. Again, the way we live our lives, the way we interact with others, the way we prioritize our needs versus other people's needs. And it's not about doing everything perfect, right? It's not about getting things wrong, necessarily making mistakes. It's about how maybe we respond when we make the mistakes with honesty, humility, and with a whole lot of grace and mercy from God. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. Isn't that beautiful? Oh, thank goodness the old things pass away and all things become new. And it's just not the inner way we live, it's our outer life. He makes all that new. And I've experienced it. And so today we're going to talk about some people in history, but also some people in our own congregation here are going to share. First of all, I want to talk about John Newton. And some of you may know who he is. Here he is, handsome fellow. He was born and raised in England. His dad, as a young boy, his dad was a ship captain and was gone much of the time. And he loved his mother. Him and his mother had a really special relationship, and they would read the Bible together, and John and his mother would memorize the scriptures, and these scriptures really became a part of his young life. Well, sadly, when he was 7, his mother died. And for anyone, I went through this in my 50s, and it was devastating to me. I can't imagine, as a young child, losing a mother. And she was really the center for him in all things. And so his mom died, and at age 11, he was sent out to sea to be a sailor with his dad, who was a sea captain. And so his life drastically changed. And much of his teen years were spent at sea with sailors. He had 2 years away at boarding school, which wasn't a good thing either. And so his life is just in upheaval. It's tumultuous. By the age of 18, he was pressured by his dad to join the Royal Navy. I think his dad probably saw him headed for not good territory, and he's like, I know, you're going to go in the military. And so he went into the Royal Navy. And at one point, Newton tried to desert and was punished in front of a crew of 350. 18. He was stripped to the waist and tied to the grating. He received a flogging of 8 dozen lashes and was reduced to the rank of a common seaman. Following that disgrace and humiliation, Newton initially contemplated murdering the captain and committing suicide. He was going to throw himself overboard. He was so miserable. And although he recovered physically, the scars of not just that, but everything that had happened to him were there. And John Newton himself describes this period in his life himself as a creature. He described himself as just a creature, sinking into despair. And he considered himself a failure on every level. His life then to run away from that despair, from that feeling of failure, he decided to enter into just extreme indulgence. And anything that could bring physical or personal pleasure, he pursued. Eventually, John became a captain of his own ship. And sadly, he was a captain of a slave ship and also an investor into the slave trade. And this is all by the age of 23. And many of you in this room are close to that age. Think about all that sadness, all that darkness that had just culminated into this person who was not a good person. So then in March 10th, 1748, John and his crew were caught in a terrible storm. And as he was drowning, he called out to God and asked for help. He called out to God and asked for mercy. And over the next few years, he met this friend named Mary, and she pointed him to Jesus. And then he also read a book called The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. And through that moment of being rescued from the ocean, a friendship, and then the truth in this book, he fully gave himself to God and encountered the living Jesus. And he left his life on sea. It wasn't just his heart that changed. He had to leave it all. He left his life on sea, and he decided he wanted to minister. And so not only did he become a minister, but he became a force, which you can watch many movies about, to end slavery. And he was a huge part of that story. And so something that he was at one point a champion for, he was a champion against. He met Jesus, and there were signs. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old things have passed away. Behold, all things are made new. And much like King David, who we talked about last week, he was a songwriter and a poet. And if you don't know, I know some of you know, but he wrote one of the most singable and known hymns that the church sings. He wrote Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Isn't that beautiful? And there are 12 verses to this song. I did not know this before. We sing I think 4 or 5. There are 12 verses to this song. He went from being a man who cursed God to being a man who praised God. Another verse that I saw, there's just this, you should read all 12 verses because it's really the story of his encounter with Jesus. In evil long I took delight, unawed by shame or fear, till a new object met my sight and stopped my wild career. That's a good one. Isn't that great? When we encounter Jesus, there will be signs. And we change. And with the story of John Newton, we see a life that was changed. Revelation 12:11, they, being God's people, triumphed over him being Satan, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. As followers of Christ, we give evidence through our words, our actions, our lives, that we have encountered Jesus. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And so today, we triumph. We triumph by the word of our testimony, by sharing the evidence of what happened when we encountered Jesus. I grew up, my dad was a pastor. We went to church at least 3 times a week, and Sunday nights were often testimony nights. We would just show up at church, there would be singing, worship, and then people would tell their testimony. They would tell their stories. And let me tell you, those services often were some of the most powerful ones, because people just were sharing their heart. And so today we have a couple of our friends who are going to come up here. Dad and Kiera, if you want to come on up. We have some friends who are going to share their testimony. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, you can sit right there, honey. Yeah, you're going to be in the middle. Yeah. So, one thing that is, I think, really beautiful is that when we are a part of a community like this, we get to do life with people who are newer to the walk, newer to the faith, and those who've been doing it for a while. And up here, we have that. We have 2 different experiences in different places of life, but yet they've encountered the same one. And so my question for them, and we're going to start with Kiera, is how did encountering Jesus change your life?
Okay, so I guess I grew up like in the church. I was in the Lutheran church. I grew up there, and I grew up in Toma. But I thought that a relationship with Jesus, or like I just thought that being a Christian in general just looked like you go to church on Sunday and you sing a few songs and you recite a few things, and then you go back home and you just go back to life and do it like you normally do. But yeah, and I was just, I was really caught up in trying to find my purpose in like worldly things. Like I wanted money, I wanted like a good career. I was so caught up in trying to find my purpose in like looks and stuff and personal appearance. Yeah, and so I went to college at Stout because I wanted to go and I wanted to get a degree in interior design, and I wanted to have that career. I wanted to make money that way. But yeah, there was something that wasn't right about that school. So I transferred to UWL, and I met a few friends here. And I was invited to church here, and I remember coming here for the first time. And I didn't know what was different about this place, but the people here were so, they were just so different. Like they just, and I know now that it was the love of Jesus that was in the people here. And I saw that and I was like, I want to know more. So I kept coming to church here, and eventually I also encountered Jesus here as well, and also like Chi Alpha has been a huge part of that for me too, a huge help. And I remember like a specific time that I encountered Jesus. We were at fall retreat for Chi Alpha, and we were worshiping one night, and I just remember that like the peace of God just came over me, and it was a whole different experience that I'd never felt before. And I just knew that I wanted to follow Jesus. like that was one of the first moments that I knew that I wanted to follow Jesus. So.
Good morning. My family started in East Central Arkansas. My mother was driving a log truck by the time she was 15. She was married at 16, had her first child at 16 years of age. She came from a very dysfunctional family. She had 4 brothers who were loggers and operated stills back in the Ozark Hills. That actually rhymes. She had 1 other sister, and they were made to work very hard. My mother had a very dysfunctional life. By the time she was 25, she had been married 3 times, and at that point there were 5 or 6 of us born at that time. As I entered into high school, I was 14 years of age and had become the object of my stepfather's anger and derision. I would be quick to tell you that both my mother, my biological mother, and my stepfather worked very, very hard. There were 9 of us children, and always a stray uncle or 2 living in the house. That was just the nature of our life. We lived on a small Missouri farm. My mother had an 8th grade education. My dad had a 3rd grade education. So they worked very, very hard, laborious jobs. Worked very hard and supported their family well. Both my mother and my father gave all of us children, all 9 of us, very high work ethics that stayed with us for all of our lives. But my father, my stepfather, and I had this very adversarial relationship. He was a very angry man. He was very abusive, and he punished very, very severely. That created within me an anger that at 14 years of age was very, very severe. Taking a step back, my mother found the Lord in those mid-20 years that I was talking about. She found Christ, and for a number of years was the only believer in her family. And much to my surprise through the years, even today I think about this, she stayed with my father, this abusive man. She lived with him, and she defended her children as best she could. But she herself through those years was pretty much an emotional wreck, as you might imagine. But she tried to keep us in church. And she'd take us to these cottage prayer meetings where if there were 8 or 10 of us in attendance, that was amazing. Don't ever be afraid of small churches. Powerful things happen in small churches. And those years were influential in my life, but they didn't do anything to change who I was. I was angry. In school, I was always in trouble. I had a well-marked path to the principal's office. I was a tall, lanky kid, and if I wasn't picking a fight, then someone was picking a fight with me. And that's the anger that was I was angry at home. I carried that anger and that animosity into my school life. I was flunking out of school. I was in trouble constantly. And before the word was popular, I was a punk. I was just a punk. And I had no disregard or no regard for other people. And I didn't mind hurting them if they didn't mind hurting me. That's where I was. And Mom and Dad were down in Arkansas on a vacation in late September. And I remember coming home one night and thinking about all the verses my mom used to read from the Bible. And I remember putting on an old vinyl record. You remember the big round LPs, and you'd put them on. And I put on an old gospel singer, and I knelt in front of that phonograph is what we called them then, record players, and gave my heart to Jesus at home. 2 weeks later, I went to an Assemblies of God revival, and an evangelist by the name of Troy Boggs was preaching there. I went forward and made a confession of faith. And I remember the next morning, now this is what was remarkable to me. The next morning, I went back to school, freshman in high school, a kid that was already sizing up the individuals that I was going to have to beat up to make it through high school and survive. And I remember walking into the doors that morning, and my friend Jerry Freeman, who's still a friend today after all these years, looked at me and said, and I thought of this when you and Kara were talking, "You're different." Bang, right off the bat. He looked into my face. He was a freshman like me. What would he know? He was Baptist. He wasn't there. And he said, "You're different, Howard." I said, "Well, I did find Jesus last week." People ask me today, and through the years as a pastor, what is your greatest confirmational point about believing in the existence of God? Ever have anyone ask you that question? And my answer has been the same for over 60 years. My conversion. Sorry. Everything changed overnight, instantaneously. My father and I never had a crossword after that. He put away the belts and all the other things that he used for punishment, because I never gave him occasion to use them. He would later find the Lord, by the way, and went to be with the Lord, as did my mother just recently and my father a number of years ago. It changed instantly.
Yeah, so beautiful. So when my dad turned 65, I collected letters from his high school friends. And what's beautiful is they've stayed friends all these years. And the ones who are still with us are still friends. And so when I was receiving these letters to put in a book for my dad, again for his 65th birthday, which was about 10 years ago, every one of them mentioned the day he came back changed. All these decades later, they still remember that day that he came changed. So God changes us. There should be signs. And is there a scripture verse that you would like to share that maybe has been encouraging to you as you've encountered Jesus again and again?
So it's actually really interesting. It's just crazy how God gives you what you need when you need it. But I was kind of trying to find one this morning, but I got a little notification on my phone from my Bible app, and it was like the verse of the day thing, and it was John 14:27. It says, "The peace I give you." Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Not let your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. And that's actually so crazy that it's so, the timing is so right. Because I went to the retreat over the weekend, and we had I think it was yesterday morning actually, Dave gave a little message about being a disciple of Jesus, and he mentioned that that involves abiding and obeying. Well, we had a time of abiding, and I took a walk outside because it was really nice out, and so I just took a walk in nature. And like I said before, when I had that encounter with Jesus, that peace at fall retreat, I had that again over the weekend. I went outside, and I finally was able to calm down and just slow down. which was really nice because recently I've just been really anxious about like future type things, like what I'm gonna do in the future. But I went out there and I just I was just taking like a prayer walk type of thing, and yeah, it was just super peaceful. I just sat there and it was like sunny out and the birds were chirping and there was like horses. It was just so cute. And so yeah, I think that has been super, the timing is perfect. But yeah, like I said, I think there was a couple more things as far as like my testimony, I guess, that I wanted to share. But encountering Jesus really did change my life because I mentioned that I was searching for like my purpose in worldly things before, but now I definitely know that God's calling me into some sort of ministry, and so I definitely, I'm gonna do that somehow. I'm still praying about that, wondering how He's going to go about that. But when you shift your perspective from like an anxious perspective to giving it to God and looking to Him, it's actually exciting. It's exciting to look about, to worry about your future, or not worry, but to think about your future, because you know that He's going to do something good with it. Yes. So.
This is out of Romans, where Paul asked the question, if God be for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? And Paul went ahead to say, down in verse 37 of Romans 8, when he talked about the things that we deal with, trouble, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, sword, so on. Knowing all these things, we are more than conquerors through Him that loved us. That verse has stayed with me a number of years. I began to embrace it just as a young man, and shortly after my conversion, I was converted on October the 11th, 1963. By November of that same year, 2 months later, I felt the call into ministry and started preaching immediately. Actually pastored my first church as a senior in high school. And as you might imagine, some converted kid out there tried to be a preacher, and I was traveling around preaching in different churches in Missouri and Illinois, and just a lot of struggles came with that. And saying, did I really do the right thing? Did I make the choice? My coaches in high school wanted me to go on and do scholarships in athletics. I was talking about baseball last night, Tom. Baseball was my thing. And my coach and my principal called me into the office one day after my conversion and said, we're worried about you because you've let religion go to your head. And I said, no, it's gone to my heart. And it's changed me. But I had those struggles. Did I choose the right path? Did I do the right thing in those early years? And this is a verse that carried me through. Nothing separates us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. And the will of God, the things that you were talking about, the will of God in finding what pleases Him becomes the big thing in life. And for that to happen, you learn that you have to overcome a lot of stuff in your own mind, in your own history, and as well as what's happening in your immediate environment. And that verse helped me a lot through the years. I still embrace it today.
Yes. Can we just give it up for these two? Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, that was beautiful. And I know each one of us sitting out there, we have a different story, right? Each one of us. And when we share it with one another, there's power in that. There's power. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. We have one more story, one more testimony that we are going to talk about. And this is a woman. Church historians actually, they feel like there is some documents that point to what happened to her and how her life changed. But we only know very little. We only read about very little in the Bible. And she is known as the woman at the well. And it's just this beautiful story. Jesus went out of his way. He stopped at a well in the midday heat, and there is a woman headed there. And we know when you read the Bible and you understand the context, there's parts to it that just jump out and you connect the dots a little bit more. And you think if you're in a warm climate and you have to go to the well, you're not going to go there in the middle of the hottest part of the day because it's hot. And actually, if you wanted to see people, you would go when other people were going to the well. But this woman, she had been married several times. We kind of gather that she was ridiculed in her community. And so she hid. And so instead of going to the well when it would be busy and run into friends, she went out there in the middle of the day. And when she gets there, I imagine she's hoping nobody's there. And she gets there and there's this man sitting there. And he said, "Hey, can you give me a drink?" And they proceed to have a conversation about thirst. And it's not the kind of thirst that really, like she thought they were talking about. Soon she realized this man at the well was talking about how to address her deep thirst, her inner thirst. And Jesus said to her, after this conversation had went on for a while, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again," speaking of the water that was in the well. "But whoever drinks the water that I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." She still didn't quite get it. Worship team, if you want to come on up. But eventually she understood more, and Jesus knew who she was through and through. He knew everything about her. And at the end of this conversation, this woman, so excited about her encounter with Jesus, she actually leaves the well, leaving her water jug behind, which the whole purpose why she went out there in the first place. But she, instead of hiding from people, she ran into town. Can you imagine that? She was out there hiding. Within the span of one conversation, she ran into town. And we read from John 4:39, "Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of this woman's testimony." And she said, "He told me everything I ever did." She went from hiding to boldly sharing who she was in her own fullness, but who he was in his fullness and what he did for her. Over the last several weeks, I've used an illustration with water. We have this little guy. We started with week 1. I already messed it up. How life gets in the way and the clear waters of our heart, they kind of turn into a mess. And that even as time goes on, we can let the things settle in our heart. Maybe the pain, the anger, whatever. And life happens and it gets churned up and it impacts the people around us, the lives we live. Last week, we showed how our hearts can get full of toxic stuff. And God's grace and mercy, it comes in and it restores those to pure, beautiful waters. And I think of the testimonies of John Newton, of Howard, of Kiara, of the woman at the well, and how Jesus came, and with his grace and mercy, he meets the thirst with his pure waters. And how from that place of accepting his grace, his unmerited favor, of accepting his mercy, him removing the punishment we so deserve, we're just so filled up, right? But then he does something even more. He doesn't even stop there, because God is so generous. He then sent his Spirit, which is his life and power within us. And he fills us with springs of living water. And it overflows. And from that overflow, we live. From that overflow, we are his disciples. From that overflow, we love. And we live life in a way that honors God. Isn't that beautiful? And yet he's the one meeting the thirst. And all our lives have to do is tell the testimony. It's simple. And the more he fills us up with his Spirit and his grace and mercy, the more we overflow into those dark places around us. Today we are going to sing together Amazing Grace, a song that was written by a man who was changed by his encounter with Jesus. And we're going to celebrate the change that we've had in our own lives because of our encounters with Jesus.